What if I told you that Ferrari could be on the verge of causing the next big ban from Formula One, even without having done anything illegal? Subscribe to continue uploading more of this type of content now, if we continue. Because yes, what you are about to discover is not only a technical improvement, it is a move so intelligent, so at the limit of the regulations, that it has forced the FIA to rethink the entire future of the category. A system hidden in the most critical area of the car, taking advantage of the exhaust gases to generate an advantage that no one saw coming, until it was too late. And the most shocking thing of all is not that Ferrari created it, but that the FIA itself approved it, and now wants to eliminate it. Are we facing a masterpiece that will change F1, or a technical scandal that will end up being banned before dominating the category? Stick around, because what's behind this blown exhaust not only explains the present, but could decide who wins in the future. It all begins at a key moment that many overlooked, but that today is understood as the origin of this entire scandal. Ferrari did not come out of nowhere with this idea. It was not a stroke of luck or an isolated inspiration. It was the result of an extremely precise reading of the technical regulations of the new era that started in 2026, where every centimeter of the car is limited, but not completely defined. And there, right in that small space of ambiguity, is where this innovation is born that today has the FIA on high alert. During pre-season testing in Bahrain, Ferrari quietly introduced a concept they internally called flick-tail mode. At first glance, it looked like a small fin placed near the exhaust, something that could even go unnoticed by the untrained eye. But in reality, that piece represented something much deeper, a new way of understanding how engine gases interact with the car's aerodynamics. It wasn't just a piece, it was a statement of intent. What this system does is as simple to explain as it is difficult to execute. It takes advantage of the hot gases coming out of the exhaust, an extremely energetic flow, to redirect them towards key areas of the rear aerodynamic flow. This allows the air passing through the diffuser to be energized, increasing the downforce without adding resistance. In practical terms, more cornering grip without sacrificing straight-line speed. A brutal advantage in a sport where every thousandth is everything. But here comes the point that completely changes the narrative. Ferrari didn't just add a piece, it redesigned the entire rear area of the car to make this possible. They adjusted the position of the gearbox, modified the rear impact structure, and found a way to fit this element within what the regulations allow as an exhaust support. That is to say, they didn't break the rules, they reinterpreted them better than anyone else. And of course, when something like this appears in Formula One, the domino effect is immediate. At first, silence. Then, you suspect. And finally, reaction. Because rivals began to realize that Ferrari had found something special. Something that not only worked, but could make real differences on the track. So much so, that in a matter of weeks, several teams began working against the clock to copy the concept. And while all this is happening, there is a question that is beginning to gain strength within the paddock. A question that no one wants to answer openly, but that everyone is thinking. If this is legal today, for how long will it continue to be legal? Because history has taught us something very clear in Formula One. When an innovation is too good, its time is numbered. The problem is no longer what Ferrari had done, but what it was causing throughout Formula One. Because once rival teams really understood how this system worked, the reaction was immediate and aggressive. What initially seemed like a technical curiosity began to be replicated in a matter of weeks, with up to 6 teams working against the clock to adapt their own designs and not be left behind in a battle that, suddenly, was no longer optional. This is where everything goes haywire. Formula One has an unwritten rule. When an innovation begins to spread rapidly across the grid, it stops being an isolated advantage and becomes a threat to the balance of the championship. And that's exactly what happened. Teams that had completely different architectures began forcing internal redesigns, compromising concepts they had spent months developing just to try to replicate something Ferrari had found first. But not everyone could do it. And that's where the real conflict appears. This system is not simply copy and paste a piece. It requires a very specific configuration at the rear of the car, total integration with the gearbox, with the impact structure, with the way in which the air flow runs through the car. That is to say, some teams were at a disadvantage from the moment Ferrari presented this solution. This creates a dangerous fracture in the grille. Because while some advance, others remain trapped in a concept that can no longer evolve at the same pace. And in a sport where the differences are minimal, this can translate into a gap that is impossible to close for an entire season or even longer. And it is precisely at that moment when the FIA enters the scene, but no longer as a spectator, but as a main actor. What was initially approved as legal is beginning to be questioned internally. Not because it violates the regulations directly, but because it breaks the spirit of what the new regulations were trying to build: more controlled cars, less dependent on extreme solutions, and with more sustainable development between teams. But here Ferrari has done exactly the opposite. It has shown that there are still gray areas large enough to completely redefine a car's performance. And that puts the FIA in an extremely uncomfortable position. Because if you allow this to continue, you risk entering a new technological war where each team will seek to exploit similar gaps, driving up costs and destabilizing the competition. But if you decide to intervene, then you are sending a clear message. There is a limit to innovation, even when it is legal. And this is where the tension reaches its peak. Because within the paddock, it is no longer discussed whether Ferrari's system is brilliant. That is beyond doubt. What is being discussed is whether it should exist. Engineers, team managers, and analysts are beginning to divide into two camps: those who see this as the pure essence of Formula One, and those who believe it is exactly the type of development that must be stopped before it is too late. Meanwhile, Ferrari remains silent, but continues to move forward. Because they know something that others are also beginning to understand. Every race that passes, every evolution they introduce, makes it more difficult for the FIA to stop this without consequences. Because the more it develops, the more teams will depend on this concept, and the more chaotic it will be to remove it. And then the big question that defines this moment arises. Is Formula One on the verge of repeating one of its historical cycles, where an innovation dominates until it is banned? Because if that happens, what we are seeing now is not just a technical advantage, it is the beginning of a countdown. Because what started as a brilliant innovation has now become a direct threat to the technical future of Formula One. The FIA is no longer observing, it is reacting. And what is being discussed in the offices is not a simple regulatory adjustment. It is a decision that can change the course of the entire category starting in 2027. This is where everything is defined. If the FIA decides to ban the blown exhaust concept, it won't just be removing one part, it will be nipping in the bud an entire line of development that has already begun to expand. Teams that have invested time, resources, and design into replicating this solution will be forced to back away. And that in Formula One is never neutral. There are always winners and losers. But if they don't prohibit it, the scenario can be even more extreme. Because this doesn't stop in its current form. Ferrari has only shown the first version of this concept. The real threat is in what comes next: more aggressive evolutions, deeper integration with the car's aerodynamics, and increasingly optimized use of exhaust gases. What is an advantage today could become absolute dominance tomorrow. And history has already taught us how that ends. When a technical solution reaches that level of impact, Formula One enters a spiral where all teams are forced to follow the same path. Costs skyrocket, technical diversity disappears, and the regulations end up being rewritten to regain control. That is exactly what the FIA wants to avoid. But here's the big problem. Ferrari has played its cards too well. Because everything they have done is legal. There is no clear infraction. There is no exact point where illegality can be pointed out. The only thing that exists is a superior interpretation of the regulations. And that puts the FIA in an extremely delicate position. Intervening now would be admitting that the regulations have flaws, but not doing so could unleash a technical war that gets out of hand. And while all this is happening, time is ticking. Every race, every improvement, every team that copies the concept makes the decision more urgent and more complicated. Because the more this technology spreads, the more difficult it will be to eliminate it without creating chaos on the grid. Ferrari knows it, and that's why they don't stop. They continue to develop, they continue to push the limits, they continue to build an advantage that is not only technical, but strategic. Because even if the FIA decides to ban it in 2027, all the time until that moment can be used to maximize results, add victories, and perhaps build a championship around this idea. And this is where everything connects. We are not just facing an innovation. We are facing a movement that can define an era. A turning point where engineering, politics, and regulations collide directly. The big question is no longer whether this will be banned. The real question is, will it be too late? Because if Ferrari manages to exploit this advantage long enough, history will already be written before the FIA can erase it. And in the end, it all comes down to one thing: limits. Ferrari hasn't broken the rules. It has shown how far they can stretch. And in that process, it has revealed something that Formula One always tries to control: but never manages to completely eliminate that the true advantage is not only in speed, but in performance. This blown exhaust is not just an innovative piece, it is a symbol. It represents the purest essence of this sport, where engineers constantly look for that void, that small loophole in the regulations that no one else has seen. But it also represents the FIA's greatest fear, losing control of the technical direction of the category. Because now it no longer matters just whether it is legal or not. It matters what it causes: a divided grid, teams forced to rethink their concepts, costs that can skyrocket, and increasing pressure on the FIA to make a decision that will inevitably leave someone at a disadvantage. And therein lies the real conflict. There is no perfect solution. If they prohibit it, they stop innovation. If they allow it, they risk the balance. And in the midst of all this, Ferrari has already won something, even before the sentence is handed down. He has led the way. Because even if this concept disappears in 2027, the message has already been clear to all teams. There are still gray areas, there are still hidden opportunities, and whoever finds them first can change everything. So the next time you see a Formula One on the track, remember this: the fastest doesn't always win. Sometimes the one who understands the rules best wins. Subscribe to continue uploading more of that content. Now you really think about all this.